A military judge is set to deliver the verdict on U.S. Army whistleblower Bradley Manning later on Tuesday. He could spend the rest of his life in prison if convicted of aiding the enemy. His defense argues that Manning leaked classified documents because he wanted to expose war crimes. But when it comes to press coverage of the case in the U.S., innocent until proven guilty may not apply. RT's Ganesh Chakan explains.
Guilty before trial. Much of the U.S. media, together with the government, have all but convicted Bradley Manning.
Look, it's simple. If Manning did what he did, they ought to try him and they ought to put his ass before a firing squad and light him up. Because
he should be punished to the fullest extent possible.
And what is that?
Death.
You think he should be killed?
Yes.
Life in prison. He jeopardized national security.
He broke the law. The president, after all, the commander-in-chief, called him guilty years before he was on trial. That's undue command influence to the judge in this trial, who is a military officer.
In thousands of leaked documents, Bradley Manning has exposed many aspects of U.S. foreign policy. Through his war logs, the public has learned about war crimes committed by the U.S. in Iraq and Afghanistan, perhaps best illustrated by the leaked collateral murder video. This classified footage showed the ease with which the crew of a U.S. Apache helicopter killed civilians in Iraq. We've seen protests in support of Bradley Manning throughout the country. You come across demonstrations of support in places like this restaurant/bookstore in Washington, D.C. And their support is not so much for Manning as an individual, that too, of course, but more importantly for the public's right to know. But Manning's supporters are in the minority. Polls show that the majority of Americans consider Manning a traitor.
Who cares whether the Army killed some innocent people or not over in Iraq? We don't want to be a part of that. It's very uncomfortable. So if it's a complex issue and it's uncomfortable, Americans generally will pull back from it, and it allows the media to fill that gap and portray Bradley Manning as a traitor.
It's been all too easy to label Bradley Manning a traitor. Perhaps because his revelations had to do with the U.S. government's wrongdoings abroad. Polls show that Americans are more sympathetic to Snowden, perhaps because his revelations are about their rights, their civil liberties, so they care more. When it's some Iraqis' rights, they apparently care less. Some argue that politics and timing have also played a role in the media coverage of Bradley Manning's case.
If this had happened during the war and WikiLeaks got this stuff out, scooped all these major media outlets right as the Bush administration was ending and the war was still an issue and something that was raw in the American psyche, might be something different. But we're a short attention span people. So 3, 4, 5 years later, he's a traitor. 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, he might have been a hero.
The main narrative that the U.S. government has pushed forward, and it was effectively delivered by the U.S. media, was that Manning's revelations have endangered U.S. national security. But the conversation that's been avoided is that perhaps the government's killing of civilians, with drones and otherwise, has generated more enemies for the United States than Bradley Manning's revelations have. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chakan.
Manning has already pled guilty to 10 lesser charges related to giving secret documents to WikiLeaks. The prosecution says that it was done with malicious intent and that it gravely harmed U.S. national security. But Denver Nix, who has written a book about Manning, says that there's been no proof of that.
There's no hard evidence that I've ever seen that American lives were lost as a direct result of what Bradley Manning leaked. There's no question that the Army has overcharged in this case, though. He does not deserve to be, executed or spend the rest of his life in prison. Bradley Manning has offered to plead guilty, basically, to 10 lesser charges that would land him in prison for 20 years. So that by the time he got out, he would have spent almost half of his life in prison. He would have been in prison almost for as long as he's been alive today.